God bless your America and my America. United we stand, divided we fall. And as Chairman Green noted, the U.S. Border Patrol knows some of them have links to the Chinese military. Today I sit down with Gordon Chang, author of the new book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. We need to decouple because we need to remove the incentives for people in our country to support the Communist Party. They're trying to break apart the Philippines. We see this right now at Sabina Shoal. Last month it was Second Thomas Shoal. Before that it was Whitsun Reef. But all of these areas which are very close to the main islands of the Philippines and very far from China. We see momentum toward war. And we Americans have got to ask ourselves, what is going to stop the momentum to war? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellett. It's a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders. Well, thank you so much, Jan. You, of course, have a new book that you've written, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. And so let's just kind of flesh out what that looks like. And that's also, for some people still today, a very strong statement to make. Really, China's trying to destroy America? Isn't it dependent on America? Well, it is dependent on America, but the Communist Party, People's Daily in May 2019, People's Daily, the most authoritative publication in China, in a landmark editorial declared a people's war against us. And we're Americans, so we think we can ignore what our enemies say. But for Communist China, People's War is a phrase that has great resonance. Going back to the beginning of the People's Republic, just about a year ago, PLA Daily, PLA is People's Liberation Army, PLA Daily actually defined People's War for us. It said, People's War is total war. And we have seen China wage a campaign of unrestricted warfare against the United States. I think that the Communist Party views the U.S. as an existential threat. And it views us as an existential threat, not because of anything we say or do, but because of who we are. You have an insecure regime in Beijing is worried about the inspirational impact of America's values and form of governance on the Chinese people. So I believe the Communist Party does not think it will ever be safe as long as the United States exists. I want to touch on this. This isn't something you talk about in the book as much, but a lot of people are concerned with America's sort of accelerating debt. Even the debt payments have become a significant portion of annual revenue. And at the same time, the Chinese economy is deeply intertwined with the American economy, right? And as much as there's some level of so-called de-risking or even decoupling beginning to happen on the American side, we know that Xi Jinping is pursuing that on his own terms. Over on the other end, there is still this, kind of tight connection. And I guess the question I have is, it almost seems like there's no way to avoid some pretty significant pain. I don't know what you think about that. Yeah, there will be pain. I mean, we have pursued misguided China policies for 5 decades. So no one should think that we can get out of this without pain. And there will be. But we have to do that if we're going to maintain our independence and our sovereignty, because China is maliciously attacking us. We're not defending ourselves, which is one of the reasons why I'm so concerned, because, a weaker society can destroy a stronger one. That's happened throughout history, and it could happen very well now. But I wrote the book because I felt that we need to talk about China in realistic terms. Because we don't comprehend the danger from it. So let's talk about this unrestricted warfare, or sometimes called asymmetrical hybrid warfare. China has been using all sorts of means under the Chinese Communist Party, all sorts of means to, destabilize, maybe lessen America, kind of push America into this decline. And so just why don't you kind of lay out for me some of the pieces of this puzzle, what that looks like? Well, right now we're in an election season, so one of the things that China's been doing is it's been creating fake posters on social media and then trying to divide the American people by making these outrageous statements about all sorts of things, like reproductive rights, for instance, which is very controversial in America. So there's that. And then in TikTok, they've clearly decided to support one candidate. So they're using that in a way to elect a president that they want. And this also goes back to 2020, where China's interference in both the primaries and the general election was substantial.
So there's that piece to it. But of course, there's intellectual property theft. You know, people have estimated this to be about $500 billion a year. I mean, we don't know exactly the full dimension of it, but it's a very substantial amount. Then there's China's promotion of fentanyl, and that's about 75,000 lives that we lose every year. 75,000 Americans die from doses of illicit Chinese fentanyl every year. So this is a project of the Communist Party to weaken America. And the list goes on and on. China uses every point of contact with the United States to take down our society.
You know, let's talk a little bit about the fentanyl, because, you know, typically you hear about it. We've covered this issue on the show quite a bit, but it's the Mexican cartels that are, you know, kind of delivering the fentanyl across the border primarily. So how is it Chinese fentanyl?
Well, it's, first of all, the precursor chemicals for fentanyl come from China, and they are mixed by Chinese technicians who work for the cartels. And the cartels do smuggle it abroad. Before this, the Chinese were selling the fentanyl already mixed into the United States, delivering it through a number of means. The U.S. cracked down on that, so they then started to go through the cartels. But we've got to remember that the fentanyl producers, some of them, in fact, are state-owned enterprises, and some of them are just criminal gangs.
The precursors, you mean, right?
Yeah. Making the precursors, and the pill presses and all the other paraphernalia. The Communist Party runs a total or a near total surveillance state, and these large fentanyl producers and gangs couldn't operate without the knowledge and approval of the Communist Party. But it even gets worse than that, because we know that Chinese diplomats give cover to the fentanyl producers. Every container that leaves China is inspected by Chinese officials. The fentanyl gangs, they launder their proceeds through the Chinese state banking system. Chinese-owned TikTok promotes illicit drug use in the U.S. The list goes on and on. And, you know, Xi Jinping, he's made promises now to 3 American presidents to stop this. Trump in 2018, Obama in 2016, and most recently to President Biden in last November. So this is unrestricted warfare, and this is very effective because as a society, we're not dealing effectively with what the Communist Party is doing. We just sort of say, oh, this is crime by, you know, bad elements in China. No, it's not. Well, the Communist Party is a bad element, but it is. We do not understand the nature of the crime, and we don't understand the fundamental nature of this.
You know, one of the things you reminded me of in reading your book was, you know, Chairman Green, of course, of Homeland Security. There's this question of Chinese nationals of military age coming across the southern border. And I remember when Chairman Green basically made a statement that some of these were basically identified as being affiliated to the People's Liberation Army, which I'd actually forgotten that aspect. And that's pretty significant, right?
Absolutely, because we're talking about tens of thousands of Chinese migrants coming across our southern and northern borders. And I think most of them are who they say they are. They're just desperate people who want to live in a free society, who've given up on China. And so that's the one side. But also we're seeing a change in composition of Chinese migrants. So if we go back 2 or 3 years ago, it's basically family groups. Now you're seeing packs of single males in groups of 5 to 15, military age, traveling without family members, some of them pretending not to speak English. And as Chairman Green noted, the U.S. Border Patrol knows some of them have links to the Chinese military. Also,
thanks,
just to give you an example, it's not just the southern border. In February, U.S. Border Patrol apprehended, I think it was 3 Chinese migrants sneaking into Maine. And what was ominous about this was that there were Chinese nationals on our side of the border who were obviously there by prearrangement to help them get in. And, you know, if you want to live in the U.S. because you just don't want to live in China anymore, you surrender to Border Patrol because you want the debit card from New York City. If you're trying to come in undetected, it means that you're coming here for some sort of nefarious purposes. It could be because you're waging war in the U.S., could be because you're a triad member. I don't know. But the story can't be good.
You know, it's interesting that when we think about the Chinese presence in America, there's a ton of students that are in all sorts of universities. I had John Lanchowski from the Institute of World Politics on recently. He was talking about how many, thousands of intelligence collectors there are. There's this whole kind of incentivization structure through the social credit system that even if you're not some kind of agent, which of course probably most people aren't, you're certainly incentivized to gather bits and pieces of that. And send it home for benefits, social credit benefits. And of course, there's, like you said earlier, a ton of people coming across just looking for a better life, because this is where people go for that, as we can clearly see. How do you, deal with this whole kind of scenario? Because you don't want to stigmatize everybody, right? How do you see that?
Well, on the students, just mention one thing, and that is that we know that Chinese consular officials and Ministry of State security agents actually surveil those students and get them to commit espionage, get them to engage in political activities which is inappropriate on our soil. And this is our country. We allow that. So this is something that we got to do. Remember, under the Communist Party's top-down system, every Chinese national has to obey the instructions and demands of the Communist Party. And China's 2017 National Intelligence Law actually codifies this in one area, where Chinese nationals are required to commit espionage if they receive a demand. So as a matter of national survival, we have a right to give special scrutiny to Chinese. My dad came here as a Chinese student, so I have a special place in my heart for this. But nonetheless, when we talk about the effect, this is something that we have not been able to deal with. And so we're going to have to take extraordinary measures that we now consider to be politically unacceptable if we're going to keep our country.
Maybe you could flesh out a little bit, the different ways in which the Chinese regime has infiltrated American society. You lay out a lot of them in the book, and it's frankly, extremely concerning when you see the broader picture.
I'll give you one example. Linda Sun, who is now being accused of being a Chinese agent. She worked for Andrew Cuomo, the former New York governor, and for Kathy Hochul, the current New York governor, helping China's diplomacy by targeting Tibetans and others, and taking substantial sums from the Chinese government for doing that. And there are others in the New York Democratic Party who are, I think, also going to be subject to investigation. But give you an example of how pervasive this is. We know that the Ministry of State Security, in the form of Christine Fong, first contacted Eric Swalwell. The Chinese Ministry of State Security didn't first contact Swalwell when he was sitting on the House Intelligence Committee, where he would have been of great value to China. They first contacted him when he was sitting on the City Council of Dublin City, California. This is not to say that Swalwell has done anything wrong, but it is to show how pervasive and how comprehensive the Chinese penetration of our political system is, because Swalwell could not have been the only person who was groomed. There must be hundreds of Swalwells, if not more, which means that there must be hundreds, if not thousands, of Ministry of State security agents running around our country trying to compromise American politicians.
Yeah.
You just reminded me something in your book. You talk about Charles Burton talking about the sort of different color codings for ways to compromise, I guess from the Chinese perspective, foreign people.
Yeah, Burton, who is, I think, Canada's most incisive China watcher, because he was a diplomat, Canadian diplomat in Beijing, and now he's at a think tank. And Burton has talked a lot about China's penetration of Canada, which is maybe even more comprehensive than its penetration of our society. This is interesting, because I hadn't heard about it before, about how, the Chinese are great planners. They organize everything. Well, they've got this 3-color coded system, one color for corruption, just money, another color for sex, another color for something else. And it's fascinating how how meticulous they have been in the way that they have targeted us. But they've done a very good job of it because they've devoted enormous resources to it. They cannot accomplish their goals, they believe, unless the United States is out of the way.
And Gordon, I'm just going to take a quick break right now, and we'll be right back. China's project to destroy America. Let's talk a little bit about, the sort of the immediate things that we kind of need to do here in your mind. Right?
We need to sever all of our contacts with the Chinese regime. I know that is
very strong, right? Almost unimaginable. How do you do that, right? So many goods still.
I'm not saying it's politically acceptable, but I am saying it is necessary. And the reason is we're being overwhelmed. We are being overwhelmed by a Chinese regime. Our law enforcement is being overwhelmed. Our universities are being overwhelmed. Our businesses, Hollywood, just you name it. And if we don't have a hold on this. And until we are able to manage this, we need to take those contacts and sever them. It's going to be tough. It will be painful, as we talked about, but nonetheless, it's necessary. And that's why I'm so concerned, because we are not willing to do what is necessary to save our society.
So how does this play out then?
Nothing's inevitable, but we see momentum toward war, and we Americans have got to ask ourselves, what is going to stop this momentum to war?
Let's talk about that a little more. Now you're talking about kinetic war specifically, I think, right?
Yes.
So what do you see there exactly?
I see what's going on right now in the South China Sea against the Philippines, where we have these extremely belligerent, provocative acts, some of which constitute acts of war against the Philippines. And we've got to be clear about what's going on. And the Biden State Department has issued 12 warnings that we are prepared to defend the Philippines because of our mutual defense treaty with Manila. President Biden himself has issued 3 oral warnings to the same effect, the 2 most recent being in October of last year and in April of this year. The Chinese have just blown by those. They don't care. They keep on getting even more belligerent. And that means deterrence is failing. Now, I can't put my hand on my heart and say Xi Jinping has made the decision to go to war. But I know something 100%, and that is Xi Jinping has made the decision to risk war. And he's made the decision to risk war with a treaty ally of the U.S., which means he is prepared to go to war with the United States at this moment.
And just to kind of flesh this out, by these, extreme provocations in the Philippines, that's what you mean, right?
Yes, they're trying to break apart the Philippines. We see this right now at Sabina Shoal. Last month it was Second Thomas Shoal. Before that it was Whitsun Reef. But all of these areas, which are very close to the main islands of the Philippines and very far from China, they are within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. That's the band of water between 12 and 200 nautical miles from the shoreline, where a coastal state has special rights. And also in 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the case Philippines versus China invalidated China's claims to places like Sabina Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, and all the rest of them. So what China is doing is, China, which is a party to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, is just completely ignoring its obligations. So it is decided that regardless of anything, it is going to break apart the Philippines. And this is aggression. It may not be as clear as Sudetenland, but it is the same thing.
We have the Russia-Ukraine war, which of course, some people describe as a, proxy war with the U.S. with so much U.S. support, right? We have Israel-Hamas war, right? We have these situations and even, some noise with Japan, increased overflights in Taiwan, a lot of aggression, and these, increasingly belligerent, like some of these, the ramming of the Coast Guard cutters, these things, this could escalate, right?
60 Minutes aired that segment. Their crew was on a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, and the Chinese rammed it anyway. The Chinese had to know that CBS crew was on that vessel, and they rammed it. And that shows that they have now want to intimidate the rest of the world. This is a change in psychology. This is extremely dangerous.
Are we on the verge of potentially a broader conflict? Because isn't this how these world wars begin? There's a lot of regional problems, and then kind of they sort of, combine into something much bigger and much graver. This is something I've been thinking about recently and very concerned about. What do you think?
This is one word answer to your question. Are we on the verge of a wider war? Answer is yes. The longer version. If we go back to the 1930s, there were separate wars, and they merged into what historians now call World War II. And the question that we now have to ask ourselves is, are those conflicts that we see around the world, are they going to merge into World War III? And the answer to that depends on China. And we see what Xi Jinping wants to do. We see the risks he's willing to take, that he is prepared to wage war on the United States. And I'll go back to that question I asked. What is going to stop the momentum to war? Look at Britain and France in the 1930s. And look at us now. England slept, as they said. We're the ones who are sleeping now. Yeah, we'll rally ourselves after a great loss of life, but I'd like to see us rally ourselves before then. I'd like to see ourselves prevent the war that is coming. I'd like to see peace. I would like to see a stable world, but clearly right now we can perceive the worst events in history.
Potentially coming, I guess, if we don't wake up.
Yes. Yeah. They will come if we don't wake up.
Well, Gordon Chang, it's such a pleasure to have had you on again.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all for